The room went silent when the lawyer read my father's will. Every cent, every acre of land, every memory we had built, he left it all to a woman none of us knew. My name is Grace, and in that moment, my whole world collapsed. But something inside me whispered, this isn't the whole truth. Why would my father betray his own family? Why would he trust her more than us? I had to find out. Tell me, if you discovered your parents' will left everything to a stranger, would you fight for answers, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts below, because this story isn't just mine. It could happen to any of us. The church smelled faintly of lilies and wood polish, the kind of scent that clings to mourning and memory alike. I sat rigid in the second pew, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that the nails bit into my skin. My father's casket lay at the front, an oak box, catching what little light streamed through the stained glass windows. People shifted, cleared their throats, and whispered as though they had already moved past grief into gossip. Then came the sound of papers being shuffled. Mr. Coleman, my father's lawyer, adjusted his spectacles and stepped up to the lectern. His voice was measured, practiced, but what he said cut through the silence like glass breaking. Henry Miller, being of sound mind and body, hereby leaves the entirety of his estate, properties, investments, and accounts to Evelyn Brooks. The name echoed inside me, cold and sharp. Evelyn Brooks, a woman I had never heard of, never seen at family gatherings, never mentioned in my father's steady cadence of advice and promises. And yet, there she was, 3 rows back, dressed in flawless black, her back perfectly straight, her expression calm, too calm, as though she had rehearsed this moment. My breath caught in my throat. Beside me, my brother Jacob remained still, his eyes lowered, not a flicker of protest crossing his face. It was as if he had expected it. Meanwhile, Aunt Rose on my right stiffened. She reached for my shoulder, her hand warm against my trembling body, and whispered so low only I could hear, Grace, everything isn't what you think. Trust me. But how could I? My father had promised me security. I remembered nights when he told me, your future is safe, Grace. I've taken care of it. Those words now felt like ashes in my mouth. Evelyn's name had rewritten my father's life story in an instant, leaving me stranded in disbelief. I looked over again. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't shift nervously like the rest of us. She simply folded her hands, accepted murmured condolences from strangers, and tilted her chin like a queen on her throne. That faint smile, meant to be polite, struck me instead as victorious. My chest burned, but my voice refused to leave me. Not here, not in front of everyone. When the service ended, the crowd shuffled into smaller groups, some heading toward the reception hall, others to the graveyard. I stayed seated, numb, as if the wooden pew had swallowed me whole. Jacob avoided my eyes, walking toward Evelyn, who laid a hand on his arm. The intimacy of that gesture sickened me. I forced myself to rise, each step heavy, and drifted toward the side room where Mr. Coleman was gathering his documents. His leather folder lay open, papers stacked neatly, but as he closed it, a loose page slipped free and fell to the floor. He didn't notice. My heart pounded. I bent quickly, pretending to steady my bag, and slid the page into my hands. It was another version of the will. My father's signature sprawled at the bottom, unmistakable. But the line for the beneficiary, the most important line, was blank. No Evelyn Brooks. No one at all. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My pulse thundered in my ears. Why would he sign a draft without a name? Did someone add Evelyn later? Or was this proof that she had forced her way into our story? I folded the page, my fingers clumsy, and tucked it deep into my purse. The weight of it was unbearable and electric all at once. Evidence. Or maybe just a question too dangerous to leave behind. When I turned, Evelyn stood at the doorway watching me. Her lips curved faintly, eyes sharp and calculating. She knew I had something. I could feel it in the way her gaze pinned me, unblinking. I clutched my purse to my chest, forcing myself to walk past her. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face, carrying the mingled scents of flowers and rainbow. The church bells tolled faintly, but inside me another sound rang louder. Resolve. The will was not the end, it was the beginning of something far darker. My father had left more than an estate behind. He had left a secret, and I was holding the first fragile thread of it. The clink of cutlery against porcelain was the only sound for the first 10 minutes of dinner. Jacob's long farmhouse table, polished to a shine, was crowded with dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered rolls, and bowls of green beans that steamed faintly in the warm light. It should have felt comforting, family gathered after a funeral, but instead, the air pressed down like a trial about to begin. And then Evelyn Brooks sat at the head of the table. Not beside Jacob, not off to the side, but squarely in Father's old chair, as if she'd been waiting years for this moment. My breath caught in my throat. She smoothed her black dress with practiced calm, the silver bracelet on her wrist flashing under the chandelier. Her every gesture seemed deliberate, as though she were marking territory. I sat across from her, my fork untouched. The empty seat where Father once presided burned in my mind. Evelyn leaned back with the ease of someone who belonged, and when she spoke, it was with that same unshakable calm. "Grace," she said, her tone almost tender, "I know this must be difficult for you, but your father wanted peace. He wanted his wishes to be honored." Her eyes found mine, dark and steady, as if she were testing my strength. Around us, the conversation stuttered to silence. Even the scraping of Jacob's fork paused. "You speak as though you knew his wishes better than his own daughter," I replied, my voice low but firm. A few cousins exchanged glances. Evelyn's lips curved in what passed for sympathy. "Your father confided in me more than you realize. He wanted someone to truly understand him, to preserve what he built. You were busy with your own life." The words landed like stones. Busy? I had spent years running errands for Father, sitting with him through doctor appointments, listening when his breath grew shallow. Yet here was Evelyn, rewriting the story with a soft voice and an unshakable smile. My mother-in-law, the eldest woman at the table, still respected in family hierarchy, interjected, her tone soothing. "This is not the time for division. We must remember Henry with dignity." But the room was already alive with whispers. One uncle leaned toward another, muttering, "Maybe she's right. Henry never mentioned details." Another cousin pursed her lips, nodding as if Evelyn's presence alone justified everything. I felt my pulse rising, but Evelyn continued, calm as a blade. "Henry chose me," she said, her voice lifting just enough for everyone to hear. "Because I was worthy. He wanted his estate in hands that could respect it. That's what true loyalty looks like." The words carved into me. My fork clattered against my plate. The audacity of her certainty left me trembling. I turned to Jacob. "And you?" My voice cracked, but carried. "Do you truly believe she deserves everything? Do you believe Father wanted his children left with nothing?" For a heartbeat, the entire room held its breath. Every eye shifted to my brother. He set down his glass of wine, avoiding my gaze, his shoulders stiff. "I think," he began, then stopped, shaking his head as though weighed down by invisible chains. "This dinner isn't the place." His refusal to answer was louder than any confession. My chest tightened, grief colliding with anger. Evelyn's smile deepened, her calm composure unbroken, as if Jacob's silence was all the validation she needed. The conversations around the table resumed, quieter now, but filled with speculation. I barely heard them. My world had shrunk to the page folded in my purse, the draft will with no name, and the sight of Evelyn occupying Father's seat like a crown she had stolen. I gripped my napkin until my knuckles ached. Aunt Rose leaned closer, whispering again, "Grace, patience. Don't give her everything she wants tonight." But patience was slipping through my fingers like water. Evelyn had declared her worthiness in front of everyone, staking her claim not just on paper, but in the very space Father once commanded. And Jacob, my brother, my supposed ally, had let her. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping against the hardwood. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Enjoy the meal," I murmured, though my voice shook. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the table to its whispers and Evelyn's satisfied smile. Behind me, the clatter of dishes faded into a hush. My question still hung in the air unanswered. "Do you really believe that?" And Jacob's silence was the only reply I had. I drove to Jacob's place before the frost had burned off the fence rails. I didn't call. When he opened the door in flannel and bare feet, the house smelled like coffee and wood smoke, every winter morning of our childhood. For a breath, I wanted that safety back. Then I remembered Evelyn in Father's chair. "I need the truth," I said, stepping past him. "No more, not the time." "Who is she to him?" Jacob rubbed his temples. Father's photo with the black ribbon watched us from the mantel like a judge. Grief and anger moved through me like two tides colliding. I kept my coat on, hands jammed in the pockets so he wouldn't see them shake. The rug under my boots was the one we used to build forts with. It didn't make me smaller this time. It reminded me how long I'd been the one to fold things back up. "She wasn't a stranger," he said. They'd known each other for years, since before the divorce. My ears rang. "Years? And you knew?" I suspected. He'd disappear, said he was meeting donors for the scholarship fund. The donor had a name. "Evelyn Brooks," I said, tasting iron. "He told me to leave it alone," Jacob went on. "He wanted dignity. He didn't want gossip chewing his bones while he was alive." I laughed, a hard scrape in my throat. "So he bought dignity by giving her everything?" He said she took care of him in ways we didn't, kept the peace. He wanted his reputation clean and his later years simple. "And you agreed," I said, "because it keeps the business stable. Because a grateful widow is easier to work with than an angry daughter." He flinched. The old clock near the window ticked like a countdown. "I thought if I kept things calm," he said, "we'd avoid scandal. Maybe she'd be generous. Maybe she'd keep me on to run the farm. The will leaves her everything, Grace. Fighting her takes money we don't have. We'll just be the kids who dragged Father's name through the dirt." "That isn't prudence," I said. "It's surrender dressed as virtue. That's not fair." "Fair?" I pulled a folded paper from my bag, the draft Will I'd palmed at the funeral. He drafted another version, no name filled in. He hesitated. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Where did you get that?" "Where it fell. Keep pretending her claim is pure if you want." He was still deciding. That's the truth. He covered his face. He asked me what to do. He said he owed her. Owed her what? Company, cover, drives to the clinic, cleaning when he got weak. He said you were busy with work. He said I had the farm. The words stabbed, then went numb. I had sat through pneumonia nights and burst pipes in bad winters, but I had also left for school. Guilt and determination had shared the same suitcase. And Evelyn, what she offered, had become the currency he measured us by. "What do you owe her?" I asked. "I owe this family a future that isn't scorched earth." There it was, neat as a signed check. He was choosing the safe road under her velvet thumb. "Then here's my road," I said, standing. "I won't let a stranger take what was built on the backs of people who loved him before she learned his coffee order. I'll find what he hid, what he doubted, and I'll show it in daylight." "You'll break us," he said, almost a plea. "We're already broken," I answered. "I'm done pretending the cracks are pretty." The front door let in a bite of air when I opened it. Jacob didn't follow. The clock kept ticking. Somewhere, a kettle hissed. I slid the draft wheel back into my purse, the edges pressing my palm like a promise. On the porch, frost filmed the steps. The yard wore that pale winter color that makes everything look honest and cruel. At the car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We should talk." I didn't reply. Not yet. I started the engine. Warm air came on with a dusty smell. In the mirror, the farmhouse looked smaller than when we were kids. Maybe it always was. I put the car in gear and pulled away, one hand on the wheel, the other still clenched around the will with no name. Aunt Rose pressed a tiny brass key into my palm like a secret blessing. Your grandmother kept a metal lockbox in the old attic, she murmured. If anyone deserves to open it, it's you. The key was warm from her hand, the bow rubbed smooth by years of turning. It fit perfectly against my lifeline. I slipped it into my pocket and felt a steadiness I hadn't had since the funeral. The attic door stuck at first, swollen with winter damp. When it finally gave, a dry smell of cedar and dust lifted into the hall. I pulled the chain on the lone bulb. The light shook, then steadied, revealing trunks, mason jars filled with buttons, a busted rocking horse, and stacks of banker's boxes labeled in my mother's careful hand: utilities, taxes, harvests, repairs. The handwriting alone tightened my throat. I followed the map Aunt Rose had drawn on the back of a grocery list, left of the chimney, under the quilts. The lockbox waited there, steel gray and modest, the kind of thing you ignore until you need it most. The brass key slid in and turned, with a satisfying click. For a second I just held the lid, breathing, as if raising it might change the weather of my life. Inside lay a neat parcel of bank envelopes bound with twine, 2 spiral notebooks, a stack of canceled checks, and a small leather-bound journal the color of black tea. A curl of dry lavender fell out, fragile as ash. I set everything on a crate and sat cross-legged on the floor, dust sifting down like slow snow. The top envelope held quarterly statements from Miller Community Bank. The name on the account read, Harper Family Education Fund. I traced the letters with my thumb. Line after line showed deposits, calf sales, a crop insurance payout, a refund check. Then, months before Father's health slid, a series of withdrawals noted only as transfer consolidation. The balance dwindled to nearly nothing. I felt the same numb drop I'd felt when Henry's will named Evelyn. The next envelope held a ledger in Mother's hand. Scholarship envelopes for church, seed corn, grace, application fees. Then a break. After that, her tidy columns bent into worried scrawl. My pulse sounded in my ears. I opened the leather journal. January 14th, Mother had written. Henry says there are things I don't need to know. He calls them arrangements. A woman named E keeps appearing in his sentences like a shadow at noon. I swallowed and read on. February 2nd. If he brings shame to our door, the farm will feel it for a generation. On a page dog-eared and smudged with something like oil, a sentence stood alone, underlined twice. Henry has a secret that will tear this family open if light ever touches it. I stopped and stared at the floorboards until the buzzing in my head faded. The bulb hummed. From the yard below came a distant clank of gate chain in the wind. I turned another page. March 10th, Mother wrote, do not trust Evelyn. Keep the fund for the child. If I cannot guard it, Grace must. The words were plain, unadorned, the way my mother spoke when she'd decided. My name in her script steadied me and shook me at once. I flipped to the back pocket of the journal. Tucked there was a crinkled receipt from Miller Community Bank for a new safe deposit key and a narrow strip of paper with numbers, an account ending in 4179 and a locker number circled twice. Beneath it, one more line in my mother's swift hand. If he is persuaded, bring proof to Rose. My heart tripped. Proof. Rose. I returned to the envelopes. A canceled check bore Henry's signature next to E. Brooks' reimbursement. In the memo line, he'd written only a tidy dot. The erasure felt louder than a confession. Another sheet, in Henry's blocky print, listed house repairs, front porch, hospital, drives, cleaning. The total matched the last transfer out of the education fund down to the penny. A floorboard popped in the hall. I froze, listening. Nothing. Still, I moved faster, snapping photos with my phone. Account pages, the journal entries with my name, the deposit slip for the safety box, the check to Evelyn. Every shutter sound felt like a small hammer strike on the coffin of Henry's story. I skimmed the spiral notebooks. One was a grocery tally. The other carried Laura's quiet weather. April rain, fence down. Then, in the margin beside a list for school supplies, a single arrow pointed to a phrase, "Not the time to be meek." Dust tickled my nose. I closed the lockbox and ran my fingers over the cold lid, thinking of how many times my mother must have done the same. She hadn't been meek. She had gathered numbers and names. She had left a trail. I gathered the journal, the ledger copies, and the strip with the account and locker numbers and slid them into my tote between a scarf and an old sweatshirt. The metal key in my coat pocket felt heavier now, as if it belonged to more than one lock. I wound the twine back around the envelopes I wasn't taking and set the box exactly where it had been, folding the quilts over it like a final blessing. At the attic door, I paused and looked back at the bulb's thin circle of light around that small square of steel and cloth. The house creaked as if it too exhaled. Laura had left me a map. Henry had left me doubts. Evelyn had walked in and sat down like she owned the chair. I would need all three truths to finish this. Downstairs, the afternoon had lowered itself across the fields. I slipped the key onto my own ring, next to my car and mailbox and the back door to the mudroom. The clink sounded like resolve. I tucked the journal deeper into my bag. Whatever this cost, I would pay it. Whatever silence had protected, I would break it. I stepped off the last stair with the weight of the papers steady against my hip and the thought as clean as cold water. I will find the rest of the truth, and I will bring it into the light. By late morning, the dining table looked like a crime board. Bank statements lined up, my mother's ledger open, envelopes flayed. I sorted the pages by date and traced the numbers with a pen. There it was, transfer, consolidation. Under it, small, external account ending 0893. The next statement showed a debit memo. Beneficiary, Evelyn Brooks. The air felt colder. My education fund now read 0. I photographed every page and totaled the figures on a yellow pad. The math matched the last withdrawals from my fund to the penny. I added a copy of the canceled check to E. Brooks and the safe deposit slip circled in my mother's journal. Not enough to topple a will, maybe, but enough to puncture a lie. I slid everything into a blue folder and drove to Jacob's, where Evelyn's sweater already claimed our mother's chair. "I want to walk through some accounts," I said, setting the folder on the table. Jacob offered a cautious smile. Evelyn didn't. She folded her hands and studied me like a stubborn stain. "These are deposits to the family fund," I began, tapping the columns. "Here are transfers into an external account ending 0893. The bank confirms that number is yours, Evelyn." She laughed lightly. "I have plenty of accounts, Grace. Henry took care of many things. You're reading ordinary housekeeping like a mystery." Jacob cleared his throat. Dad moved money around. Taxes, renovations. He was complicated. "Complicated isn't secret," I said. And this line, beneficiary Evelyn Brooks, wasn't plumbing. Color rose under her foundation. "Henry reimbursed me for care," she said, each word clipped. "Groceries, drives to hospice. Every mile cost something while everyone else was busy judging." Her shot made Jacob flinch. I kept my voice even. "Then you won't mind when Miller Community Bank issues a certified activity report with vendor descriptions." "You won't get far," she murmured. "Privacy laws are a blessing." Aunt Rose stepped from the doorway like a late witness. She set down her purse and unfolded a yellowed receipt. "Executors and next of kin can request details, and some clerks still remember Laura's handwriting." She pushed the slip to Jacob. "Cash withdrawal, $10,000, 3 days before the hospice bill came due. That invoice wasn't paid from that fund." Jacob stared at the numbers, then at Evelyn. It was a small, clean win, a first crack in her porcelain calm. I turned my pad so the neat columns faced them. "Here's the sum of the transfers," I said. "Here's the check to E. Brooks. Here's the note in Mother's journal. Keep the fund for the child. If Dad moved it, he hid it. If you took it, you know where it went." Evelyn stood, smoothing her sweater. "What I know is Henry wanted order," she said. "And order is coming. I have appointments. You'll be hearing from people who can help stop this rummaging through graves." A chill prickled my arms. "What appointments?" She was already at the door, light flashing on her bracelet. "The kind that lock doors," she said, and left. Jacob exhaled. "She's bluffing," he tried without conviction. Aunt Rose shook her head. "She isn't. The courthouse opens at 1. If she files for a temporary hold, she can freeze accounts, lock the safe deposit box, and keep the bank from releasing anything without her say-so. We have a window." I gathered the papers. The blue folder felt light and heavy at once, like a key before it meets a lock. "Then we use it," I said. Certified printouts, copies of the journal, a stop-release note to Miller, and a visit to hospice. Aunt Rose squeezed my shoulder. "I'll drive. You call the bank." On the porch, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number slid across the screen. "Friendly advice, stop before you lose more than money." No signature. Beneath it, a courthouse address and a time, 1:15 p.m. I slipped the phone into my pocket and gripped the folder until its edge left a red line on my palm. The wind shifted, smelling of cut hay. "Let her try to lock every door," I said. "I've already found the hinges." Mr. Matthews chose the window booth at the only diner still open after the lunch rush. Fluorescent lights hummed. Coffee smelled burnt and familiar. He rose when I walked in, a courtly reflex from decades of teaching. His hands were colder than mine. "Grace," he said. "I should have called you sooner." I slid the blue folder beside the sugar caddy. "I just need the truth," I said. "Whatever you remember about my father and Evelyn." He stared into his cup, then at me. "Henry confided in me last spring. He said he'd streamline his affairs. His words. He was proud of being tidy." A rueful smile. "Then he said something that stuck like a thorn. He'd reassigned your college fund, put it under Evelyn's management so she could allocate wisely." The room tilted a little, though I stayed still. He used those words? Reassigned. "Allocate." "He did," Matthews said. "He liked the sound of them. He even tapped his breast pocket and said, 'Paperwork's in motion, Em.' He meant the bank and a safe deposit update. I laughed it off that day. I shouldn't have." "Why didn't you warn me?" The question slipped out softer than I felt. "I thought I was protecting his dignity," he said. "Your mother was gone." He was grasping at order. "I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Evelyn would keep records. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I opened the folder and fanned 3 statements on the Formica. "Is this the timing you remember?" I pointed to 2 lines, a transfer into external account ending 0893, and a week later, a debit labeled consolidation. "This is the week you spoke?" He pulled on his reading glasses. "Yes. I remember because the seniors' car wash fundraiser was that Saturday. Henry came by with donuts and said he'd settled the school thing for you. He was pleased with himself." He tapped the date. "Same week." I slid out my mother's ledger, the page with her careful script. "Keep the fund for the child." Matthews read it as if it were a poem, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "Laura always wrote like a contract," he said. "This matters." Will you say what you told me on the record?" I asked. "A simple written statement. Your dates." His words. He hesitated only a heartbeat. "I will. I'll sign it. I'll include that he called Evelyn the manager of your fund. He used that title. It bothered me then." A small knot in my chest loosened. Not victory, but traction. I turned a page in my legal pad and wrote while he dictated. The month, the diner where Henry had once met him, the phrase "paperwork in motion," the boast at the car wash. I added a section for his signature and the time. He signed with a steady hand. "May I keep a copy?" he asked. Of course. I took out my phone and scanned the page to PDF. "Chain of custody," I said, half to myself. "Date stamps, backups." He nodded, the teacher pleased by a student's thoroughness. "There's one more thing," he said. "I saw Evelyn at the bank. She carried a manila envelope with your name on the corner under a strip of masking tape. She laughed with the manager and said, Henry wants me to simplify. The manager looked uncomfortable. You might talk to him. He's old enough to remember what integrity feels like. I wrote the name he gave me and the hour of the sighting. It matched the safe deposit slip I had found in my mother's journal. The data points clicked together, neat as dovetail joints. For once, the story wasn't a fog, it had edges. Thank you, I said, and meant it. I don't want to ruin anyone. I just want the truth to sit in the right chair. That's justice, he said, not revenge. We paid at the counter. He folded his receipt into a square and tucked it into his wallet like a promise. Outside, the late sun threw long bars of light across the hallway that led to the restrooms and the exit. I stepped ahead to hold the door for him, then stopped. Evelyn stood there under the employees only sign as if it were her name. A pale scarf at her throat, nails the color of cranberries. She didn't look surprised to see me. She smiled the way a winter field looks white until you touch it and feel the ice. Not warm, not soft. Busy afternoon? She asked, eyes flicking from my folder to Mr. Matthews's face and back to me. Productive, I said. How wonderful, she murmured. Henry always loved a girl with a project. Her gaze drifted to the pen, clipped to my pad, then to the signature still drying on the page beneath the clear sleeve. Be careful not to mix up drafts. Paper can be such a slippery friend. Mr. Matthews stiffened beside me. I heard his breath catch. Evelyn's smile did not change. She stepped sideways just enough to let us pass, and lowered her voice so only I could hear. See you at the celebration, she said. It's so nice when families pull together. I pushed open the door. Cold air slapped my cheeks awake. Behind me, the hallway swallowed her heels. In my hands, the signed statement felt warm, real, and heavy enough to anchor me to the next step. By Sunday noon, the town had heard it all. I was the grasping daughter, the one plotting to steal what was never mine. Evelyn didn't shout. She murmured in grocery aisles and between pews, choosing the softest places to drop hard rumors. People tilt toward whispers. They always have. I walked into the community center carrying cookie tins for the fundraiser and felt the room tighten around me. Mrs. Pike's smile thinned. Two fathers paused mid-laugh. Across the hall, Evelyn stood with her hand light on Jacob's sleeve, her voice low, her eyes bright with careful concern. It's sad, she was saying, but grief twists people. When she saw me, she gave a tiny nod, the way queens acknowledge subjects. On the sign-in table lay a manila envelope with my name in block letters. Underneath, loan agreement. The handwriting was the same rigid print I'd seen on the fake investment receipt last week. I slid a finger beneath the flap and pulled out 3 pages. My name was typed at the top and at the bottom, my signature, or what someone thought it should look like. I steadied my breath, counted to 5, and held the paper to the light. The G in grace swooped like a treble clef. My G is a closed loop, tight as a buttonhole because my left hand drags the ink if I don't close it. The slant leaned right. My letters lean left. The notary stamp listed a Sunday date, and our bank doesn't notarize on Sundays. A shadowy witness line carried Aunt Rose's name misspelled with a Z. Evelyn glided over. You must be exhausted, dear, she said. Mistakes happen when we're tired, but at least you've had the dignity to put it in writing. Her gaze skimmed the signature. I took out my phone, opened a fresh evidence album, and shot the document front and back, then the envelope, then the table clock. I toggled to settings and filmed the screen while the time and GPS floated in the corner, capturing metadata in one continuous take. Chain of custody isn't just a phrase, it's a path you never leave. Jacob, I called across the room, would you come look at something? My voice carried more steadily than I felt. He disengaged from the cluster and joined us, shoulders tense. This says I borrowed money from Evelyn on a date the bank doesn't even notarize, I said, laying a palm beside the stamp. Also, Rose's name is misspelled. And, do you remember my signature? I signed my name on a blank note card, left-handed, the loop closing tight and the line tilting left. I was 5 when you taught me to sign to pick up Dad's packages, Some habits don't change. Jacob glanced between the card and the alleged contract, color draining a shade. It's not the same hand, he said, unwilling to say, forged. Evelyn didn't blink. Perhaps you signed in a hurry, she offered sweetly. Grief does that. I clicked my pen. If I were grieving then, why does the document say this week? I turned the page. And why is the cashier's check number on line 3 identical to the one used on that investment receipt you waved at me in the market? I photographed it, remember? I pulled up the earlier image. The numbers matched like teeth in a zipper. A murmur moved through the nearest tables, the small animal sound of a herd changing direction. Aunt Rose, who had been stacking cups, folded her arms and stared at the notary date. Bank was closed, she said, loud enough for 3 conversations to stop. Evelyn lifted a shoulder. Then the notary used the wrong stamp. People are sloppy. Unlike Grace, I don't keep the world in a binder. I met Jacob's eyes. Or the notary doesn't exist. I turned to the last page. The commission number was clearly printed. Give me 2 minutes. I stepped away, opened the Secretary of State's notary search on my phone, and typed in the number. No record. I filmed the screen and my watch, and then the room, as if the truth itself were a witness. When I returned, I set the phone face up and hit play. No such commission, the results showed, plain as a stop sign. For the first time since the funeral, Jacob really looked at Evelyn. Not past her, not through her, but at her. An old tenderness in his face cracked, a plank splitting in the sun. Ev, he said carefully, where did you get this paperwork? She smiled with all her teeth. From the same place Grace gets her courage, she said. Necessity. Jacob, I said, softer now, you taught me how to spot a bad bolt on the hay baler because one fault can wreck a field. This document is a bad bolt. If I signed a loan, the bank logs would show the withdrawal and the deposit. They don't. I lifted the envelope. And the stamp is fiction. His jaw flexed. He looked at the gathered faces, then at the floor. When he raised his eyes again, something had moved behind them, like a curtain drawn back an inch. He wasn't beside me. Not yet. But he wasn't entirely beside her either. I slid the envelope into a plastic sleeve, labeled the seal with time and date, and asked Aunt Rose to initial the edge. Evelyn watched, a statue learning how people breathe. You can perform all the little rituals you like, she said. In the end, Henry chose. Maybe he did, I said. Maybe he also wrote things down that tell a different story. I lifted my folder, the statements, the ledger page, Mr. Matthews's signed account, and held it close, not like a weapon, but like a compass. Across the room, Jacob took a step back from Evelyn without meaning to. It was small. It was everything. By late afternoon, the town felt like a stage set before opening night. Folding chairs went up in the church hall. A placard near the door read, Supplemental Will Reading, Family Only, which meant everyone would try to slip in anyway. Down on Main Street, Evelyn stood under the bakery awning, with 2 of Dad's old colleagues and a reporter from the weekly paper. She smiled as if the sun came up for her alone and said, clear enough for the sidewalk to hear, tomorrow I will close every argument. People laughed the soft, obedient laugh folks use when they want to be near a winner. I kept walking. I had no more air to give the rumor mill. At Aunt Rose's kitchen table, the smell of lemon oil and starch steadied me. I laid out my folder and spoke each item like a pledge. Bank statements showing transfers from Dad's private account to Evelyn's LLC, the ledger page from the feed store with Dad's handwriting, the same slant I learned to trace as a child. The notarized affidavit Mr. Matthews signed last night, stating Henry bragged about reassigning Grace's education fund for Evelyn to manage. Photos of the fake loan packet and the metadata screen I filmed when I opened it. Screenshots of the state notary search that returned no record. And, tucked inside a clear sleeve, the early draft of the will with the beneficiary line blank and a note in the margin that read, in Mom's hand, do not trust Evelyn. Keep the land for Grace. Aunt Rose ran her palm over the tablecloth to press a wrinkle flat. You have enough, she said. Enough is a door. Walk through it. I am afraid, I said, because the truth is easier to carry once you name it. Courage is not the absence of fear, she answered, pouring tea. It is what you choose to hold while your hands are shaking. Do not fear, child. The truth is a weapon. She slid a small roll of tamper-evident tape to me. Seal what matters. I rebuilt the file like a medic resets a broken limb, each page in order, each sleeve labeled with a time and a place. On the outside of the main envelope I wrote, Family Meeting, January 2nd, 9 a.m., Church Hall. I added a list of exhibits A through F and stuck it to the flap. Then I packed a second envelope, thinner, labeled for Jacob alone, his name in my careful left-leaning script. Inside, I placed the loan forgery comparison, the notary search printout, and a note in 5 lines. One fault can wreck a field. Look closely. Choose well. As dusk pooled around the porch, a truck pulled in the gravel. Jacob stepped out, hair uncombed, tie tucked in his pocket like a surrender flag. He didn't come inside right away. He stood under the porch light and looked at me through the screen door like he was trying to remember who I had been before grief made me difficult. Evelyn says you're going to make a scene, he said. I'm going to make a record, I said. There's a difference. He rubbed the back of his neck. She also says Dad wanted peace. He wrote down what he wanted, I said, sliding the thinner envelope toward the screen. Read this tonight. No one has to know you did. He took it without touching my fingers the way you accept a lit match. I don't want a war in front of the whole town, he said. Then end the war before it starts, I answered, with facts. He hesitated, then nodded once. I'll see you in the morning. He stepped off the porch. Halfway to the truck, he paused and looked back as if some quiet part of him had just stood up inside his chest. After he left, I walked the long path behind the house where the grass turns silver under frost. I rehearsed the order of things aloud, not for drama, but for clarity. First, the draft, then the bank transfers, then Matthews's affidavit, then the forged loan and the broken notary stamp. I practiced saying exhibit without shaking. I practiced saying my name is Grace as if I had never forgotten it. At 9, Aunt Rose brought out Dad's old coat. Too big for you, she said, which is why it can hide what needs hiding. I slid the main envelope inside the inner pocket where the lining was still stitched tight. I sealed the pocket shut with the tamper tape and signed across the seam. The bulge lay flat against my ribs, a paper heart beating steady. My phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn lit the screen. For your sake, leave the past alone. He wanted this. I stared at the words until they blurred, then turned the phone face down. Another message arrived from an unknown number. It was a photo of the church hall chairs already lined up. Under it, one sentence. Tomorrow is for the living. I deleted nothing. I screenshotted everything. Before bed, I placed duplicates of each document in a fireproof pouch and handed it to Aunt Rose. If I forget who I am, I said, half kidding, half plea, remind me. She touched my cheek. You are the daughter who learned to carry heavy things without breaking them. The house settled, old bones easing into quiet. I stood by the back door and zippered my coat. The envelope lay warm where my palm had rested. I slid my hand into the pocket and felt the crisp edge, the proof of what words can do when they come dressed in paper and ink. Outside, the cold lifted steam from the creek. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. Tomorrow would be a room, a table, and a line I would finally cross. I turned off the kitchen light and felt the dark hold me without malice. Then I stepped into it, with the envelope secure against my heart, ready to put the truth on the table. The church hall filled like a courthouse at high noon. Folding chairs scratched against the floor, the coffee urn hissed, and every whisper seemed to land on my shoulders. Evelyn arrived last, coat draped over her arm, smile polished to a shine. She took the front row, as if it had been reserved for her, and crossed her legs in a victory pose. Jacob trailed behind her, pale from a night without sleep, the envelope I had given him tucked under his arm. I stood before the card table the deacon had loaned us and set down my battered manila folder. My name is Grace, I said, steady now that the moment had a shape. I am here to make a record. I slid out Exhibit A, the early draft of the will with the beneficiary line blank, and Mom's note in the margin. I placed it in a clear sleeve and faced the room so no one could claim I had done anything in the shadows. Exhibit B, the bank statements showing transfers from Dad's private account to Evelyn's LLC. Exhibit C, Mr. Matthews' sworn statement about Dad reassigning my education fund. Exhibit D, the forged loan packet Evelyn's allies had waved around, paired with the notary search that returned no record. I named each page, the way you name landmarks to keep from getting lost. Evelyn gave a light laugh. Sweetheart, paperwork can say anything if you comb through enough trash. Then it should be easy to disprove, I said. I turned to Jacob. You read what I left you. He stared at his shoes. When he looked up, he did not look like a man about to perform. He looked like someone who had decided he was done lying to himself. I did, he said. He tapped the thinner envelope on the table. The signatures on the loan are not Dad's. The notary number is invalid. And I saw the transfer confirmations in his email. Evelyn told me they were part of a temporary arrangement. That was not true. A sound left the room, not quite a gasp and not quite a groan. Evelyn's smile faltered. Jacob, you are confused. Henry trusted me to handle things he could not bear to explain to a child. I am not a child, he said, voice low. And you asked me to introduce you as the woman Dad meant to marry. He never said that to me. Not once. Aunt Rose stood, hands folded, and faced the chairs as if she had been called to a witness stand she had known was coming all her life. Henry gave me the small key to the attic safe when Laura was sick, she said. He told me, if I am gone before this is straight, you make sure Grace knows where to look. I saw Laura write that margin note with my own eyes. Do not trust Evelyn. Keep the land for Grace. I have kept my silence because death asks for dignity, but dignity is not the same as secrecy. Evelyn rose halfway, then sat again, the movement short and sharp like a misfired gesture. Rose, with respect, you never liked me. With respect, Aunt Rose replied, that is not relevant. I lifted Exhibit E, the sheet from the feed store ledger with Dad's handwriting, and spoke as if reading a prescription. This is the line where he paid taxes on the north acreage from the account ending in 9142, the same account you emptied 2 months later, Evelyn. The dates match the bank statements. The handwriting matches his journals. I set the page beside the others, building a small wall between us. Evelyn scraped her chair back. Your father wanted peace, she said. He told me so the night before he died. Peace built on a lie is a trap, I said. We are cutting it open. Jacob's voice softened. Evelyn, did you file an amendment with the clerk when you took those funds? Yes or no? She wet her lips. The clerk made an error. Did you file? He repeated. Silence spread, slow and heavy. Even the coffee stopped hissing. Evelyn looked at the door, then at me, then at the stack of papers that refused to blink. At last, she lowered herself into her chair and said nothing at all. The room felt taller for a moment, as if the ceiling had lifted to let in air. Minnie, pay off. The words were not in my head, but the feeling was. The stagey confidence, the bright lie, the endless hum of gossip, they all went quiet. A dozen faces turned from Evelyn to the pages on the table, because paper does not flinch. I reached into my coat and brought out the final envelope, the one I had not let myself open without witnesses. It was cream stock. The kind Mom had used for Christmas letters, addressed in her looping hand. Laura Henry, written across the flap, followed by the words, for Grace at the right time. The seal cracked with a soft sigh. I unfolded the single page, already thinner from years of being folded and refolded, and read the first line aloud so my mother's voice could enter the room with her own authority. If you are reading this, it said, it means the truth has come to light. Morning slid into the kitchen like a soft apology. I set my mug on the counter, breathed in the steam, and carried the small fireproof box to my desk. The key Aunt Rose had given me turned cleanly in the lock. Inside lay the original will, the codicil, and the ledger pages that had kept me awake for weeks. I placed each document into a fresh sleeve, labeled the spine, and slid the binder into the top drawer. The rails whispered shut. The click of the lock sounded final in a way words never are. Outside, frost clung to the pasture fence. A red truck moved slowly down the county road, someone heading to work or back from a night shift. Life, unbothered by our drama, went on. Dad was gone. That truth still had weight, but it no longer bent my back. What changed was the shadow that used to ride beside it. Mom's name had been dragged through years of rumor, then folded into a lie to make someone else comfortable. Today, the paper and the voices that mattered had given her name back its shine. Peace did not roar in. It arrived like sunlight widening across the floorboards. My phone buzzed. Jacob. Bank at 10? New signature cards. I typed, I'll be there, and added a period because I meant it. We had decided last night, after the hall emptied, to act quickly while clarity was still warm. Aunt Rose would witness. David from the feed store would notarize. We would file copies at the clerk's office and keep one set in my drawer, one in Jacob's safe, and one off-site. Not because we were afraid, but because we had earned the right to be careful. The door creaked. Aunt Rose leaned in without knocking, as she always had. She held a paper bag and the look of someone who had watched storms for a living and still chose to plant tomatoes. Biscuits, she said. You'll need something real in your stomach. We ate at the counter. She didn't ask how I felt. She buttered 2 biscuits and passed me one. Laura would have liked the way you handled yourself, she said finally. You let the truth carry itself. No yelling, no show. I wanted to yell, I admitted. Of course you did. That's why you didn't. She wiped a crumb from her lip. What matters is what stands when the talking stops. I thought of Evelyn's eyes searching the exits as the room went quiet. Word had already traveled that she packed a suitcase before dawn and that the realtor's sign would be in her yard by the weekend. I was not glad the way you are glad about a sale or a surprise day off. I was relieved the way you are relieved to wake from a fever and find you can taste water again. Relief is quieter than triumph, but it lasts longer. At the bank, Jacob was waiting on the bench under the fake ficus. He stood when I walked in, and for a beat, we were just 2 kids again. Mouths full of apologies we didn't know how to say. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. I'm sorry, he said. Me too, I said, and mean became a bridge we could both stand on. Inside the glass office, Ms. Patel laid the forms in a neat stack. This establishes joint management, she said, pen tapping the line. 2 signatures for any transfer over $5,000. Quarterly statements to both addresses. Alerts on all activity. She looked at each of us in turn. Transparency is a habit. You'll be fine if you practice it. We signed. When it was done, Jacob exhaled the way you do after finishing a long run you hadn't trained for. On the sidewalk, he held out his palm. A small key lay there, new and bright. Safe deposit box, he said. I had them add you. I'll take a copy of the binder and you keep the original. We'll rotate every quarter so neither of us gets lazy. That's the kind of rule Mom would have liked, I said. He smiled, sad and honest. She liked rules that protected people. We drove to the clerk's office and filed duplicates. We emailed scans to ourselves and stored them with dates in the subject line. It felt almost ceremonial. Each small, boring step an oath. When the last receipt slid into my purse, Jacob cleared his throat. One more thing, he said. No one gets to use Dad's name to bully you again. Not me, not the church ladies, not the neighbors who think they know the story. If they try, send them to me. Or to the drawer, I said. Especially to the drawer. By noon, the sun was high and honest. I stopped by the diner for a sandwich to go and drove home with the radio low. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and winter air. I set the sandwich on a plate, poured another cup of coffee, and carried both to the desk. I opened the top drawer one more time, not because I doubted, but because the sight of those pages calmed me. Proof is not love, and it cannot replace what is lost, but it can hold the floor steady, so love has a place to land. I closed the drawer and turned the key. No one repeats this mistake, I said aloud, testing the shape of the boundary in my mouth. The room held the words without echo. It felt like a promise made to myself and to the people who had tried to do right and sometimes failed. The wind shifted, light pooled on the rug and climbed the wall. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked and then decided it wasn't worth it. I took a bite of the sandwich, sipped the coffee, and let the ordinary take me back. In the next room, the heater clicked on and hummed. On my desk, the little brass key lay warm for my hand. There would be letters to answer and neighbors to face. There would be grief that came in strange intervals, loud one day and quiet the next. There would be work, but the panic that had braided itself into every thought uncoiled and lay down. I was not naive enough to think the story was over, only wise enough to know this chapter had a good end. The smell of coffee lifted, and a square of sun reached the binder's edge before inching away. I rested my palm on the drawer, felt the solid core of the wood, and smiled. The house breathed with me. For the first time in a long time, I did not brace for what might be taken. I let the morning hold. I sat quietly, closing the drawer, the stack of documents resting inside as if they had never weighed so heavily on my heart. In that moment, I realized that justice doesn't need to be loud, but it has the power to restore peace to a family. In life, filial piety does not mean blind obedience. Loving and respecting our parents must come with boundaries, with legal and financial independence, so that no one can take advantage of us. Justice may arrive late, but with evidence and reason, it will always arrive where it belongs. Outside, the morning light broke through and the smell of freshly cooked rice drifted from the kitchen, easing my heart. If this story touched you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Type 1 if you empathize. Type 2 if you think there's something that could be improved.